We're back on the chase, and I hope you've all got legs for running, for there be an hunter's moon out tonight. Of course, you're all safe in here, nursing your drinks as the candle lights flicker. But imagine, if you will, you're driving down a country road, naught but woods and fields for miles around. You're tired, making your way home from a long night shift. Then you notice something glinting off in the distance. Eyes reflecting in your headlights. At first you take it to be a fox, or maybe even a badger. Not unusual at this time of night. But as your car gets closer, those eyes seem to hover upwards. Two yellow orbs staring out of a bestial head. Soon becomes apparent this ain't no fox. Before you stands a creature, part man, part wolf. Those yellow eyes staring through your windscreen, right into your soul. And then, in a blur of matted fur, it's gone, dashing off into the night. You sit there, convinced beyond all doubt that you've just seen a werewolf. Far-fetched as this may sound, it's an occurrence that the good folk of Cannock are all too familiar with. Most of the accounts you'll find online are accompanied by the odd blurry photo or snippet of footage. More often than not, they look like they've been shot on a potato. But one account sticks out, as unlike many of the others, it occurred in the day. On February the 13th, 2004, a young family would have an encounter they would not soon forget. Mr. Hilton, a 37-year-old French language interpreter, had recently moved to the small Cannock village of Hazel Slade, an idyllic little rural community, as they always are in these tales. Seemed the perfect place for him and his wife to bring up the young daughter Emily. Having only just moved into the area 2 months prior, the Hiltons were not yet familiar with Cannock's paranormal reputation. After all, Mr. Hilton were a busy man, commuting back and forth from Birmingham every day, working up to 60 hours per week. Probably barely had time to find out where the nearest shops were, let alone learning the local law. As you can likely appreciate, moving is always a stressful affair, even more so when you're doing the daily grind. So Mr. Hilton decided to book off a much needed long weekend to spend some time with the family and relax. Having passed a few nice looking country pubs on his daily commute to Birmingham, Mr. Hilton thought it might be nice to take his wife and daughter to one. After a short drive round, he finally decided on one not too far from their new home in Hazel Slade. A nice little boozer by all accounts, good ale and friendly locals. Whilst at the bar, Mr. Hilton got chatting with a couple of blokes. They were planning on playing a few holes at the local golf club the following day, and asked if he wanted to join them. Being quite partial to a bit of golf and seeing an opportunity to get acquainted with some of the locals, Mr. Hilton agreed, and they organised a 10 AM start. Luckily, the golf course were only a few miles from Mr. Hilton's home, not far to drive. For a man who spent most of his waking hours in a car, this came as something of a blessed relief. So the next day, Mr. Hilton dug out his clubs and made his way to the links, met up with his newly made acquaintances and played a few holes. However, in his haste, he'd forgot to take out his mobile from the glove compartment. Not something he was overly concerned about. You were there to relax after all. But the relaxing morning of golf was soon to turn to horror. They were just about to finish up the final game when all of a sudden they heard screaming. Instantly the three men dropped the clubs and started running towards the sound. That's when Mr. Hilton heard his name being called. and the sickening realisation that the source of the screaming were his wife. He called back to the others and quickened his pace, crashing through the undergrowth. He reached his wife within seconds. She were in a state of abject terror, falling into his arms, babbling about, of all things, a werewolf. By this point, Mr. Hilton's mates had arrived and bore witness to his wife's harrowing tale. Their daughter Emily had decided it might be nice to make her dad a packed lunch and take it to him whilst he played golf. Mr. Hilton's wife agreed that this was indeed a lovely idea, so they made the sandwiches and set out to the course. They tried to call him to let him know they were coming, but of course he'd left his phone in the car. So they decided to go find him. Instead of traipsing across the links and risking getting hit by stray golf balls, they decided to take a more scenic route through the woods that ran round the circumference of the course. As they were making their way along the woodland path, they started to hear strange noises coming from the undergrowth. Perturbed, the mother and daughter quickened their pace, and so did whatever it was that were lurking in the foliage. Out of nowhere, something dark and terrible erupted from the bushes, snatched Emily, and dashed off into the trees. Without thinking, Mr. Hilton bolted towards the woods. He found his daughter crumpled on the floor. What he saw standing over her was something not even his darkest nightmares could conjure. A tall, wolf-like creature, standing upright on its hind legs. It sniffed the air, and its huge, lupine head snapped round in Mr. Hilton's direction. Then it turned back, took one last look at Emily, and disappeared into the woods. Mr. Hilton acted quickly, scooped his daughter up and looked her over. She had a nasty gash on her left arm and were in a considerable state of shock. So he bade his golf buddies a swift goodbye and, along with his wife, rushed Emily to the nearest A&E. The wounds were treated and Emily discharged. Now, some 3 weeks later, something strange started to happen. Thick, irregular black hairs had begun to grow on Emily's left hand. Once again she was taken to hospital, but the doctors were stumped. In the end, they settled on a diagnosis of congenital adrenal hyperplasia. This is where the body's adrenal gland produces an excess of testosterone, causing spontaneous hair growth in odd places. But, according to Mr. Hilton, Emily's condition improved almost instantaneously after the strange patch of hair was shaved off. It's not returned since. So the question remains, did this all really happen? And was it indeed a werewolf that the Hiltons saw? Well, the account is certainly an intriguing one. However, delve a bit deeper and one can't help but wonder if this is all just fakery. Mr. Hilton's golf buddies were interviewed some years later, and they are vehement that they didn't see the creature that Mr. Hilton had described. The two golfers are convinced the story is a fabrication. However, they both agree that in her terrified ramblings, Mrs. Hilton had indeed uttered the words, werewolf. Emily's recollection of what happened is also quite hazy, but she does remember being rushed to hospital on that day. But at no point has Mr. Hilton changed his story, him and his wife maintaining to this day that they saw what they saw. For Mr. Hilton, the beast has become something of a white whale, and he's searched the woods for it on a number of occasions, to no avail. All power to him. A man's got to have an hobby after all. But I'd advise him to be wary. It ain't just canine monsters that haunt the chase. And should he hear the sound of a child in distress, and his paternal instincts kick in, I'd caution him to not intervene. But that's a story for next time. Right, house special, £1 a pint. Pool table and jukebox free until closing. Don't get too merry, or you'll be needing the air of the dog in the morning. Have a good 'un. I'll be seeing you.